In the heart of Chicago's bustling cityscape, Dr. Malcolm Crowe, a seasoned psychiatrist, ran a clinic that had become a refuge for those tormented by their own minds. Over the years, he had cataloged a myriad of nightmares, each more disturbing than the last. But there were some that stood out. Nightmares so vivid and terrifying that they haunted not only his patients, but Dr. Crowe himself. One such case was that of Sarah, a young artist whose dreams were painted with the darkest shades of fear. Every night she found herself in an endless gallery, her own paintings come to life, each canvas a window into a twisted reality. The figures in her art, distorted faces and broken bodies, would reach out to her, their touch cold as death. She would wake up screaming, covered in paint that she couldn't remember using. Then there was Michael, a former soldier whose nightmares were a battlefield of the mind. He relived the horrors of war every time he closed his eyes. The sounds of gunfire and cries of the wounded, a relentless echo. In his dreams, he was always searching for his fallen comrades, only to find them standing behind him, their eyes empty, accusing him of leaving them behind. Dr. Crowe's most unsettling patient was Anna, a quiet librarian who whispered of a recurring dream where she was trapped in the library after dark. The books would whisper secrets of the end of days, and the shadows between the shelves slithered with unseen creatures. She would try to escape, only to find the exit doors leading back into the library's labyrinthine heart, the whispers growing louder, promising her an eternity in the dark. But the nightmare that shook Dr. Crowe to his core was that of a little boy named Tommy. Tommy spoke of a man with no face who would visit him at night. This faceless entity would stand at the foot of his bed, its presence suffocating, its silence more terrifying than any scream. Tommy said that the man with no face wanted to show him something, but he always woke up before he could see what it was. These nightmares were more than just dreams. They were windows into the abyss, glimpses of the darkness that dwells within the human soul. Dr. Crowe often wondered what these nightmares truly represented, what hidden traumas and fears gave birth to such horrors. As he sat in his office, the city's lights flickering like distant stars, Dr. Crowe felt a chill run down his spine. He realized that the nightmares his patients shared were not just their burden. They had become his as well. He could feel the weight of their collective fears pressing down on him, a reminder that the mind's capacity for terror was boundless. The story of Dr. Crowe and his patients serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the scariest stories are not those of ghosts and ghouls, but the ones that lurk in the recesses of our own minds. For in the end, the most frightening nightmares are the ones we create for ourselves. In the quiet town of Eldridge, a young man named Ethan was haunted by a recurring nightmare that had plagued him since childhood. It was always the same. A shadowy figure with eyes that glowed like embers would chase him through an endless forest. The dream would always end with Ethan falling into darkness, waking up just before he hit the ground. As he grew older, the nightmare faded, but it never completely left him. On the eve of his 20th birthday, the dream returned with a vengeance. This time, however, something was different. He could feel a cold breeze, smell the damp earth, and hear the rustling leaves. It was as if the boundary between his dream and reality had blurred. Ethan began to see the shadowy figure from his dreams in his waking life. It started as fleeting glimpses, a reflection in a window, a silhouette in the crowd, a whisper in the wind. Paranoia crept into his mind, and he felt the eyes of the figure watching him from the darkness. One night, as a storm raged outside, Ethan found himself alone in his family's old house. The power had gone out, and the only light came from the occasional flash of lightning. That's when he heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the attic. Gripped by fear but driven by the need to face his nightmare, Ethan grabbed a flashlight and made his way to the attic. The stairs creaked under his weight, each step amplifying his dread. As he reached the top, the flashlight flickered, and for a moment, he saw it. The figure, standing in the corner, its eyes burning with a familiar glow. Ethan's heart raced, and he stumbled backward, the flashlight slipping from his grasp. In the darkness, he heard a voice, raspy and cold. "You can't run from me, Ethan. I am your fear-made flesh." Ethan scrambled to his feet and lunged for the flashlight. His fingers found it, and he pointed the beam at the figure. But it was gone. The storm outside intensified, and the house groaned as if in pain. Ethan knew he had to escape, to get away from the nightmare that had come to life. He ran through the house, the figure always one step behind him. Doors slammed shut on their own, windows shattered, and the walls seemed to close in. Ethan's mind raced with panic as he searched for a way out. Finally, he burst through the front door and into the storm. The rain lashed at him, the thunder roared, and the lightning illuminated the figure, now in pursuit. Ethan ran through the streets, his lungs burning, his legs aching, but he dared not stop. The chase led him to the edge of the forest, the same forest from his dreams. Without hesitation, Ethan plunged into the trees, the darkness enveloping him. Branches clawed at his clothes, roots tripped him, but he pushed forward, driven by sheer terror. The figure's presence was oppressive, its breath hot on Ethan's neck. He could feel its fingers reaching for him, hear its whispers in his ear. In a final act of desperation, Ethan turned to confront his pursuer. There, in the heart of the forest, Ethan faced the figure. Lightning flashed, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw not a monster, but a mirror. The figure was him, older, worn, and filled with regret. The realization hit him like a wave. The figure was not chasing him, it was leading him. Ethan understood that the nightmare was a warning, a glimpse of a future consumed by fear if he allowed it to control him. With newfound resolve, Ethan faced the figure and spoke. "I am not afraid." The figure nodded, its eyes softening, and as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. The storm subsided, and Ethan found himself alone in the clearing. The nightmare was over, but its lesson remained. Ethan walked back to town, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees. He knew that the path ahead would be challenging, but he also knew that he had the strength to face it. For the first time in his life, Ethan was truly awake, and so, the young man who had been tormented by a nightmare from his childhood found peace. He realized that the only thing to fear was fear itself, and that by confronting it, he could overcome anything. Ethan's story was one of courage, of facing the darkness within and emerging into the light.
In the quiet town of Elmwood, a young woman named Sarah was haunted by a recurring nightmare that had plagued her since childhood. It was always the same, a shadowy figure lurking in the corners of her room, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. As a child, she would wake up screaming, and her parents would rush to comfort her, assuring her it was just a dream. But as Sarah grew older, the nightmare began to seep into her waking life. Objects in her room would move without explanation, and she would catch glimpses of the shadowy figure in mirrors and windows. The terror of her dreams was becoming all too real, and it was taking a toll on her life. Sarah's performance at her job began to suffer. She worked as a graphic designer, a job that required a keen eye and a steady hand. But the fatigue from her sleepless nights made her work sloppy. Her designs lost their vibrancy, and her hands trembled as she drew. Her boss, who had once praised her as the brightest talent in the firm, now looked at her with concern and disappointment. Her relationships fared no worse. Dates would end abruptly as Sarah's gaze darted around nervously, half expecting the shadowy figure to appear. Friends grew distant as she canceled plans last minute, too afraid to leave the perceived safety of her home when the sun set. Her family watched helplessly as the once cheerful girl withdrew into a shell, jumping at shadows and flinching at the slightest touch. Invitations dwindled as friends grew weary of her erratic behavior, and Sarah found herself increasingly isolated. Physically, the effects were evident. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of countless nights spent awake, and her skin lost its luster. She moved like a specter herself, listless and devoid of the energy that once defined her. It was in this state of despair that Sarah found herself in Dr. Adler's office, her last beacon of hope. Dr. Adler was a kind man with a gentle voice that seemed to make the room a little warmer. He listened to Sarah's story with a pensive frown, nodding along as she poured out her fears. Together, they embarked on a journey through the twisted corridors of Sarah's psyche to confront and understand her nightmare. He taught her to keep a dream journal, to write down everything she remembered upon waking. This act alone seemed to take away some of the nightmare's power, making it less ethereal and more tangible. As they delved deeper into her subconscious, Sarah began to recall fragments of a memory long forgotten. She remembered a night when she was very young, a night when an intruder had broken into her home, his eyes reflecting the red light. That night, the intruder tried to kidnap Sarah, but he failed, and her father succeeded in keeping his daughter. But the intruder ran away, and Sarah's father tried to treat her from that shock and forget what happened. But he remained in her subconscious in the form of a shadow because of the fear that continued to haunt her and his return to try to kidnap her after her father failed to catch him. Sarah woke up that morning feeling different. The weight that had pressed down on her chest for years seemed lighter. She smiled for the first time in what felt like forever, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Dr. Adler's treatment had worked. Sarah's nightmare no longer controlled her. She returned to her job with renewed vigor, her designs reflecting the bright palette of her rejuvenated spirit. Her friends and family welcomed her back with open arms, marveling at the transformation.
If you like the video, click subscribe and like, and get ready to be part of this terrifying journey. Are you ready to face the dark side of reality?